Welcome to Minimalist. I'm your host, Desiree, and this is a podcast about minimalism. Sort of. It's a podcast about how living with less stuff and less distractions can help us focus on what's most important. So what you'll find here? Of course, we will talk decluttering and living with less, but we'll also talk about the important things in life and how to approach them intentionally. We'll approach topics of motherhood, home life, relationships, work, our health, and the important things in general that fill up our days. And what you won't find here, a perfectionist version of minimalism. I'm a mom, a full-time teacher, and a podcaster, and I've found the version of minimalism that you may find on Instagram or Pinterest to be unattainable. We aren't minimalism purists here. We're simply focused on living with less in a way that's realistic to us. It's a version of minimalism I personally like to call minimal-ish. The goal is not living with less for the sake of less here, or to make sure our homes make us look like a minimalist. The goal is living with less in a realistic way so that we can have more time and space and energy to focus on what matters most. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome back to Minimalist. I'm your host, Desiree, and I am very excited to be sharing something different with you over these next several weeks of the podcast. First of all, I should note that the reason we're doing something different is we just welcomed our second daughter, Juna, into the family earlier this month, and we have just been over the moon in love and enjoying these early days as a family of 4. So because of that, I am taking my own advice to slow down and savor and be present. So what you'll be seeing from me over the next few weeks is some reruns, especially guest episodes that were from way back when, maybe 2018, 19, maybe 2020 even. Some of these episodes that I know that new listeners probably haven't heard, and if you have been listening since way back then, hopefully it will continue to add value in, a new phase of your life. I know as I have listened to these carefully selected guest episodes again, I feel they are just reaching me where I need them in this season of life. I hope the same for you. I'm excited about this. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, but I've just been hesitant, not knowing if it would add value. But as I looked through my catalog of episodes and saw some of the guest episodes from way back when and re-listened to them, I knew for sure this is what I needed to do because they really do add value and they're really hiding all the way back in those beginning episodes. So I'm excited to share them with you. This first one is one of my first dream guests that I had on the podcast, and that is Joshua Becker. Fun fact, he's also the only male guest I've had on the podcast other than my husband, but I love this episode. I think it just has so much value when it comes to realistic minimalism with a family. I won't say any more because I introduce it all in this episode back from 2019, but I do want to say that there's a little bit of weird audio in the beginning, so just bear with me on that. It does get better about like a minute or two into the episode. So thank you for your grace on that, and let's dive into this first rerun episode with Joshua Becker. Hi friend, welcome back to Minimalist. I am so glad you're here this week. This week's episode is a guest interview with Joshua Becker. I cannot wait to share with you our discussion on just getting started with decluttering. We talk about the easiest place to start, the hardest places to declutter, how to maintain a minimal home, and what to do when you don't have time to declutter. This episode is full of so many actionable steps and actionable tips when it comes to decluttering. I am just excited to be able to share this with you. I really think it's going to help you if you're feeling like either you're in like a place where you feel stuck with decluttering, or if you just don't even know where to start. This episode right here is a great place to start. Let's get to this episode with Joshua Becker. Let me just quickly tell you a little bit about him if you don't know who he is. He's the founder of the website Becoming Minimalist that inspires people to live more by owning less. He's the author of Simplify, The More of Less, and The Minimalist Home, which we are going to talk about a lot in today's episode. He's also the creator of Simplify magazine and the Simple Money magazine. And he's the founder of The Hope Effect, a nonprofit organization changing how the world cares for orphans. He and his family dove into minimalism back in 2008, and since then he's been encouraging other families to do the same. His books have really encouraged my family and I in our journey towards minimalism, and I am just so honored that I got to speak with him and that I get to share this conversation with you. So let's just dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Joshua Becker. Okay, well, we have Joshua Becker today, as I said, and I'm so excited because my husband and I started this journey, and your books, your work has really helped guide us through. So I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Well, I am pleased to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and before we really dive in, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Well, as you said, my name's Joshua. My friends call me Joshua, so that works out well. I have been pursuing and writing and blogging and speaking about minimalism for 11 years. I'm in my mid-40s with 2 kids. They're both teenagers now, but we started our journey when they were younger, 5 and 2. I didn't ever start out my life minimalist. It wasn't how I grew up. I was much more just your pretty typical suburban American, getting paid more and buying bigger houses and putting more stuff inside of them. My life changed on a Saturday morning. I was cleaning out my garage. My son was 5, and he was in the backyard asking me to come play with him while I was working on my garage project and pulling things out and organizing and tidying everything up. And my neighbor, I was complaining about how long the project was taking. My neighbor said, as I started complaining to her, she said, that's why my daughter's a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own so much stuff. And I remember looking at the pile of things in my driveway, knowing full well that my possessions weren't making me happy. At least that's what I would have said, right? We all would say that. But out of the corner of my eye, there was my son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard where he'd been all morning long. And I realized that not only were my possessions not making me happy, even worse, all my possessions were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness in life, and joy and purpose and significance and meaning. And I always think that's probably the foundational truth of minimalism, that when people see it and recognize it, it's what draws them to the idea of owning less. Not just saying that our possessions aren't making us happy, but realizing that our excess possessions are actually distracting us from the things that do bring us happiness. They're keeping us from the life we wish we were living instead. And so that's what started our journey. And much like you, I started blogging about it pretty early on and just kind of telling our story, and more and more people were drawn to it and got to inspire more and more people. And now I get to be here today. So how wonderful.
Yeah, I love that story. It's so true that our possessions and cleaning up can take so much time, just taking care of our stuff, and so much time away from the things that really do matter to us. So can you tell us a little bit more about your newest book, The Minimalist Home, your reason behind writing it?
So I wrote a book called The More of Less, Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Own. It came out in spring of 2016. And it was going to be my book about minimalism, making the case for it, explaining it, helping people understand all the benefits that come from owning less. And I love the book. I love how it came out. Most people liked it. It's got pretty good reviews on Amazon, so I'm pretty happy about that. You never know for sure what people are going to think about your book. But there were a large number of people who said, this is great. I'm in, like, this makes sense to me. I want to own less, but how do I do it? How do I get there? Like, can you practically walk me through my home, especially because I have a family, and I don't know how they're going to respond to it. And it was interesting to me, those, just a little bit behind the scenes, the number of those comments that I received surprised me, because my neighbor introduced me to minimalism, and like, that was all I needed. Like, I'm in, like, how am I going to figure this out? And how am I going to get through the house? And what am I going to get rid of? And what am I going to keep? And I kind of liked figuring it out for myself, how I was going to implement it in my life. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought to myself, it really would have been helpful to have a book to look back on, and someone who's done this before. And this worked really well and this didn't work, and have someone who could kind of mentor me through the process a little bit. So that's why I wrote The Minimalist Home. It's a room by room guide to a decluttered, refocused life. And it walks people through, I think there's 18 different spaces in your home that we go through, from the car and living room to attic and basement and storage shed and garage. And so we cover it all.
That's great. And I feel the same way. I mean, I think when we kind of dove into minimalism, it was really starting to gain traction at that point. And now it seems to have really exploded. And I think from the beginning, I was kind of searching for that too, in a way of just like, okay, what are the questions I need to ask? And, what really needs to stay and what needs to go in each room. So I have a few questions for you on that. And I would love to know what you think is, well, I already know because I read your book, but I would love you to tell our listeners, what do you think is the easiest room in the home to declutter for the average person?
Yeah, the book encourages people to work through their home, easiest to hardest, starting with the most lived in areas first. A lot of times when people hear minimalism, they hear owning less and they're drawn to it, but their mind tends to run to like the hardest thing that they would ever have to get rid of. Okay, this is great, but how would I ever get rid of my books? Or how would I ever get rid of my yarn stash? Or how would I ever get rid of my sentimental items? Like, how would I ever get rid of my hobby, camping, outdoor gear? Like, we tend to think of the hardest thing that we would ever have to get rid of. Or people go home and they start in like the garage or the basement, like they start in these really cluttered spaces. And when they do that, they tend to get very frustrated pretty early on, because you can spend an hour and a half taking things out of the garage and not see any difference in your garage whatsoever. And so people are like, oh gosh, and they just give up before they see any progress. And so the book takes a different approach, and it says, rather than starting in the hardest places in your home, let's start in the easiest spaces that you live in, so you can complete a room and you can enjoy the benefits of that room. You can see how owning less is improving your life right away, and then use that motivation to go tackle the next hardest space in your home. And so usually I think a car, like your car, is a great place for people to get started. You usually can get rid of, like, you can do your car in like 10 minutes and just put everything in a bag that doesn't need to be there and take it out of your car. And then the next time you sit down in your car, it feels like so much better to not have a little rubber ball running around in the back, or, a bunch of empty water bottles or pens, whatever it might be. It just feels very nice. And you're like, this feels great. What else? Where else can I do this? And so I usually refer people to their living room next, because that was the next space that we did. And for most people, it is the next easiest lived in space. There's usually some decorations that people don't want, and there's like an entertainment unit that needs to be, maybe there's a stack of books or magazines, or some things have ended up in the living room that shouldn't be there, like toys or tools or whatever it might be. For most people, I think they can accomplish the living room. It's not true in every case. I think a lot of people who live in small apartments, their living room tends to be a place where they end up storing boxes of things and have a lot of stuff that end up going there. But for most people, I think a living room is a good place to get started next. And then I usually say like bedroom, bathrooms, closets, those tend to be the easy. And then kitchen, office, garage, attic, like those things come towards the end when you built up that muscle a little bit.
Yeah. I like that. We had a really open concept home when we started. So we kind of did start in the living areas in general. But it's funny that you say you talk about the car, because I've always been like a cluttered car person. And I just recently finally tackled that. Is like minimalism was something that was in my entire, like seeping through my entire life, except for my car. and it's been such a change since,
The living room is great. I mean, I remember doing my living room and like sitting down, and I wish I could remember how long it took. Half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe. And it wasn't like I had to know exactly like what charity these things are going to and what am I selling, what I'm going to get rid of. Like literally it was, I just took a box and I just put things inside the box that I didn't want in my living room anymore and just moved them out to the basement until I, did find where to take them eventually. But like sitting down in the living room at the end of the day, it just felt so calm and peaceful, and like cleaning up the living room at the end of the day became like a 45-second job. Like it used to take forever to put everything away, but it's like energy was able to flow in the room, and like, man, I really like this minimalism thing in my home. It feels so much better than having clutter everywhere.
If you've wanted to know more about the Make Room Master Course, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it right now. If you feel like you are always cleaning up, but your home is never actually clean, if you feel like you're overwhelmed with your home or your life and you're drowning with too many commitments and too much to do, this course is for you. If you want to declutter, but you don't know where to start, or you don't even know how to enjoy motherhood, but you wish you did, if you're burned out and you're tired and you feel like there's got to be something more, or at least you hope so, friend, I made this for you because I have been there, and finding a realistic version of minimalism that works for me and my family has been a huge way that I have come out of this overwhelm and exhaustion. So if you want to know what the Make Room course is, it's an online course with 5 modules and 25 plus audio and video lessons to help you make room for what matters, make over your days, and settle into the life that you love. The first round of this course is going to include the accountability of a Facebook group for 4 weeks as we go through the 4 main modules together, and it's going to include a live group coaching session and Q&A session per week where you can ask any and all questions included. So that's 4 group coaching sessions total. This course is created to help you live more joyfully, to help you live with less so that you can have room for what matters to you, whether it's in your schedule or in your home. This course takes minimalism way past just decluttering, because that's not what it's all about, and that's not what it has been all about for me. The real change has come with applying minimalism to my days and my schedule and to my mindset, and I really want to help you make these essential shifts. If you're interested in things that I talk about on this podcast, if you enjoy the show from week to week, friend, you are going to love this course. And I just fully believe in everything that I've put into this course, and I cannot wait to see you in there. You can find the link to get there in the show notes, or you can go to DesireeEndries.com/mastercourse. All right, let's get back to the show. Okay, so when it comes to kind of talking about from easiest to most difficult, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. What do you think the most difficult room in the house is, I guess, for the average person again? And could you give some pointers and tips on tackling those like harder spaces, or I guess even just like harder items?
Yeah. The hard spaces tend to be the larger ones, the basement, the garage. Actually, the home office can be difficult just because there's so much paper involved. Quick tip for paper: if you can find that piece of paper online, you don't need to keep a paper copy of it. So, like bills and credit card statements and all that stuff that people hold on to, if you can find it online, for starters, you can get rid of it. So that takes a big chunk for a lot of people. But for like some of these larger spaces, basements and garages and attics, I think it is helpful to start with large items that can be removed. When you think of your garage, when you think of your basement, like there are usually just large items. when we first started, my daughter was 2 and my son was 5. And so we had just come out of that baby stage. We weren't going to have any more children. And so there was like a high chair and a crib and like the little jumper bouncy thing that kids jump in, and there was a piano actually down there as well, but they were large items. And when you get rid of the large items first, you can see the difference occurring in the room. And I think seeing that is very encouraging for people, and it motivates them to keep going. If you start by, I'm going to go through this box and this box and this box, like you can spend an hour and a half going through a box of stuff, old high school yearbooks, and like not get very far. You spend an hour and a half and you look at the room and it doesn't look any different. But if you take out the piano, like right away, you can walk in. You can like, okay, I'm making progress. I can do it. And so doing some of those large items, I think, is always helpful at the beginning. Any large space can be broken into smaller, accomplishable tasks, right? So I can do this shelf today. Like I want to get through this shelf before I call it quits. Go through this wall or this corner, and trying to complete each step before you finish, before you call it a day, basically. But not saying I need to do the whole room, but I'm going to do this whole shelf and I'm going to make it look neat and get rid of the stuff that I can. So that's why I encourage people for spaces. When it comes to categories, what do I usually hear? I guess I mentioned a few of them. Books, sentimental things. Clothes can be a hard one for some people. Dave Bruno's book, The 100th Thing Challenge, he talked about the hardest thing for him to get rid of was his woodworking tools. Mm-hmm. He said, I never used my woodworking tools, but they were still hard for me to get rid of. And he said, I came to understand that I liked the idea of being a woodworker more than I actually liked woodworking. I wanted it to be true of me that I was a woodworker, but in reality, I never used the stuff. In reality, I just wasn't a woodworker. And so he kind of wrote about this death of a dream. Is how he described it. Like getting rid of that was saying, okay, that's not who I'm going to be. And so there can be those types of things in a person's life where they realize they've always wanted to be a type of person, but they're just not. I always think once you get rid of that fantasy version of yourself, you're able to fully live more in who you actually are. So it's actually a good thing to do that. But number one, I tell people, like I said earlier, you don't start at these things. You don't start with your books and you don't start with your sentimental items. You start with your clothes. If those are the hard things for you to get rid of, start in easier spaces, easier places. See how owning less is improving your life. And then when you get to those harder things, you'll be at the mindset that says, okay, I prefer owning less. Minimalism has brought money and time and energy and space and focus, and I'm living a more meaningful life focused on things that matter because I own less stuff. So how can I apply these principles in this specific area? And people, I think, tend to find what they need once they can see the benefit of owning less. One trick is to cut it in half. I usually say, like, can you cut your book collection in half? Can you cut your sentimental items in half? Or get rid of one box of books, get rid of one box of sentimental items. Usually when you form these boundaries and you're forced to decide between what's kind of important and what's actually important, and you're forced to make those designations, it becomes a little bit easier to do. If I were to ask a book collector, if you could only keep 15 books, which 15 books would it be? It might be very difficult for them, but suddenly they have, okay, these are the ones that I really love the most. And now that you mention it, some of these over here, they're not nearly as important as this group right here. And so they become a little bbit easier to get rid of. Or you could do it the other way around. What are the 15 books? If you had to get rid of 15 books, which 15 books would you get rid of? And that type of mindset tends to help us see a little bit better which things we were holding on to because we thought we had space and which things are actually meaningful to us.
Yeah. I think my husband and I always wanted to have like a library of books, but every house and apartment we moved all these heavy boxes of books with us. And we had a lot of moves in the past like 5 years. So we've just been carrying these books. And then the only places we found for a library of books were like out of sight on shelves we didn't really like. And it's just as we kind of were feeling more and more okay with letting go of things, now we have maybe just a couple of shelves that we keep, and we do a lot of digital books. But yeah, it's interesting how once you let go of a few, it gets easier to let go of more, for sure, even the hard things. Talking about, I guess, like those bigger rooms kind of brought up another question that I get a lot from my community of listeners on here, and that is something I would like to hear from you. How do you find time, like if it's a family where both parents are working, after school stuff for the kids, just like a busy life in general? What do you suggest? Because I know it seems like this big, like huge task that's not accomplishable for some people.
Yeah. Okay. So I hear that a lot as well. And I always have two responses in my mind to it. And I never know the person well enough to know what it is. Number one, people can be really legitimately busy, too busy to find any time to do any decluttering. I don't know if anyone is really so busy that they can't find any time in their schedule to go through their home. Maybe there are people, and legitimately they come from that viewpoint. But there's the other part of me that hears it, and I just want to think. I just think to myself, look, if you're looking for an excuse to not do this, you'll be able to find it. Like you can always say, I'm too busy to do this, and I can't implement it in my life. And I think there's a point where it's just a matter of priorities. You know, like busyness isn't about busyness. Busyness is about priorities and what is most important to you, and are you going to create time in your day and in your schedule to accomplish this pursuit in your life. And if you're serious about it, then we tend to find time for the things that are really most important to us. You can just always find an excuse if you're looking for it. But anyway, So yeah, I think most of us are busy. Most of us are living pretty busy lives nowadays, especially if we're raising kids and we're working and how everything goes into it. 3 things to keep in mind. Number one, any time that you spend minimizing possessions results in more time back to you at the end of the day. And so you have to see it a little bit as an investment. If I invest an hour here minimizing my kitchen, it is going to make cooking meals easier. It's going to make cleaning up the kitchen easier and take less time for the rest of my life. And so it's like an investment that we get time back to us anytime we spend decluttering. Number 2, I think people need to set aside time if they really can't find it. There was a stretch where I woke up at 5 a.m. for like a 2-week stretch, and I didn't really like waking up early. I usually wake up at 7 to get to work by 8, but I just said, I'm going to get up an hour and a half early, and I'm going to spend that time decluttering. It's not going to be 5 a.m. for the rest of my life, but it's going to be 5 a.m. for a couple weeks, so I can make these changes in my home. So I think that usually works for people. So yeah, I guess Those were two. But if I were to recap, the three would be, number one, everyone's pretty busy. So I don't think we can use that as an excuse. Number two, any time that we spend decluttering results in more time back to us. And so number three, then it's just a matter of scheduling it, making the time. If you have family close and they can take the kids and you and your spouse can focus on stuff for a day, that'd be great. Or take a staycation day to stick around and make the changes in your home. I don't think you'll ever regret minimizing your possessions. But sometimes we do need to be pretty intentional about when we're going to do it.
Yeah. People, I think, just automatically think I think decluttering is fun because I talk about it sometimes, and I'm like, I don't think it's fun, but I think it's worth it. You know, I don't love doing it, but it's important. And I've seen how much value it's given my life by putting less value, I guess, on my stuff.
I think one other thing I should mention is, I think also if you want to minimize, you want to own less, it's helpful to think in terms of, okay, how long do I want this process to take? Because if you're really busy and you're like, well, I can scratch out 10 minutes a day to declutter, how long is it going to take you to get through your home at 10 minutes a day? Like, you don't want to be decluttering for the rest of your life. As Zoe Kim, once she wrote Minimalism for Families, I think that's the name of it. And like, that's the way she says it. Like, do you want to be decluttering for the rest of your life? Probably not, you know? So just make this a season of life where you're going to focus on it. And then once you get it down to a more manageable state, it's much easier going forward after you've made the big changes.
Yeah, for sure. How long did it take you to go through your house in the beginning?
Good question. I delineate into 3 different time frames. It took about 3 to 4 months for us to go through like the lived in areas of our home. So living room and kitchen and bedrooms and bathrooms, like 3 months to get through most of the spaces where we lived our lives. 9 months, if you want to count in the basement and the shed in the backyard at the time and the garage, like 9 months if you want to count those bigger spaces. And then we moved into a smaller home 3 years later, and we got rid of even more stuff when we moved into a smaller house. So 3 months for the lived-in areas, 9 months if you count the whole 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home, and then lo and behold, there was even more to get rid of. We discovered when we had less space in the new home.
Yeah, that's where we did that. We downsized a few months after, really, and it was kind of minimalism allowed us to make that choice. I think we realized like we don't need all this space, but we were able to get rid of even more stuff. So I do want to talk to you actually about maintenance, because I know that's something that you talk about in your book. What does that look like? What does it look like to maintain? And that's a question I've gotten a lot as well, is I guess, how do I not reaccumulate and find myself in this again? So what do you suggest?
So 2 thoughts. Number one, there is a piece that we need to overcome consumerism in our life. There are countless books on the shelf about how to declutter your home. There aren't very many books about how to stop shopping. Like, what's the mindset that we need in order to overcome that? And it's different. I think it's different. There are a lot of people who want to declutter their home who don't necessarily want to change their shopping habits as well. It requires a different thought process of, I think, appreciating, owning less, seeing the benefits of it, seeing how it's allowed your life to focus on more meaningful things, and then just beginning to know that you're looking for happiness in different places and that you're finding it in more fulfilling spots. When we start to see that, our money can be used for really positive change in the world as opposed to just buying a bigger screen television, I think that helps us overcome consumerism. But even if that's done, there is still a reality, especially when you have a family and especially when you have kids, that things just continue to come into the home and things continue to accumulate. And having some sort of system in place to remove unnecessary possessions is helpful. Whether it's a time of the year, every spring you go back through and make adjustments. I have found that, so I've been doing this for 11 years now, and like I just get to a point where I kind of feel like a space has become too cluttered. I don't know how all these clothes got in my closet, but they just seem to multiply, and it just feels like there's more than need to be there, or the kitchen, the pantry closet, or the drawers, or one of my kids' rooms, or the garage. It just seems like things slowly accumulate, and being able to recognize that and saying, okay, it's time to go back through this space and remind ourselves of what we can get rid of and what we can keep. And with kids, it's different because they like seasons change and they grow, and like their seasons of life change, and they get into different hobbies and different passions and different clothes sizes. And so like they're changing so much, being able to go back through.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you talk about that it's just like, this is a real thing that has to happen. It's not like you declutter once and you never have to do it again, but just the fact that there's maintenance that has to happen especially when there are kids involved. So I actually wanted to ask you, your kids were really young when you started this 10 years ago, when you kind of dove into a more minimalist life, and now your kids are teenagers. So how do you approach minimalism with them? How have you approached minimalism with them throughout the years? And are they do they have those values, or I guess have you raised them with those values? What does that look like?
Yes, I've tried to raise them with these values, and I've tried to raise them in the same way that you would want to pass on any value to your kids, right? We want them to be hardworking. We want them to be selfless and kind and justice-minded, and faith is important to me, and so I want them to have faith. And so, like, how do you pass on any value to your kids? You talk about why it's important, right? You look for teachable opportunities in their life. You reward positive behavior, and you try to correct incorrect behavior, and then you cross your fingers and hope for the best. I mean, honestly, everything I want to pass on to my kids, ultimately it's going to be their choice whether they're going to accept it or not. And so have they bought into it? I don't know. I mean, we have certain rules in our home, and so while they're under our roof, certainly there's, some parameters and some boundaries about how much stuff that they can own. I know that they've always seen it and they can always come back to it. I don't think there's any lasting joy in buying a bunch of stuff we don't need. I'm a big fan of over-explaining to my kids. I think anything that we're doing in life, any decision we make in life, we should be able to explain to our kids why that's the decision that we've made. And so even when my children were young, I'm like, hey, this is why we're doing this. We're using our money to support these causes. We got to go on this trip because we didn't spend money on a bunch of clothes and stuff that we didn't need and toys that we didn't need. We're able to do these types of things instead. We want to spend less time cleaning and organizing and spending more time together as a family. Helping them see how it has affecting their life, I think is super helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I have a couple of questions that I ask all of my listeners, and they're just kind of like short, fun questions. And the first one is, what is something that you're simplifying right now?
I think probably a constant battle for me is social media and just the draw that my phone can be. And and I make my living online as a blogger and writer. And so there's a part, so it's easy for me to use that as an excuse, right? Like, it's good for me to be in the Facebook page or on Twitter or Instagram, like interacting with people, because that's my business and it's really important to me. But I think keeping that in check and focusing on life right in front of me is always a constant struggle for me. So that is where I know I need to constantly be very intentional about my use of social media.
Yeah, I can agree with that. That's something I've also been trying to simplify. It's hard, so I can relate. Okay, last question I have is, what is something that you can't stop talking about right now, something that you're loving?
I started a YouTube channel in September, and I'm really enjoying that platform. Starting in September of 2018 does not put me as an early adopter onto the YouTube platform in any stretch, but I've enjoyed doing it, and I always kind of like the what works online and what reaches people, and how do people respond when I do things a certain way, and what's the best way to inspire people. And so it's still new enough to me that in terms of, how am I going to do this well, and how can I make a difference on this platform? So
yeah, that's fun. I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. I'll have to check that out. And
is it good that I said the one thing I need to be simplifying is social media, and the one thing I'm loving is the YouTube channel?
I mean,
part of the problem. Yes.
It has to be something that you enjoy to keep doing it, but at the same time, how do you simplify it? It's good. So where are some other places where our listeners can find you? They can find you on YouTube, but where else?
Becomingminimalist.com is the best place to find me. And everything I do tends to run through Becoming Minimalist specifically. So that would be the best place to find me. That'd be great.
Perfect. And I will link to your newest book. I'll link to your other books as well in the show notes. And thank you so much again for this conversation. I think it's just super helpful to hear your perspective on really digging into decluttering in the home and everything else that we talked about. So thank you.
I appreciate what you're doing here. Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Joshua Becker. I feel like it was just so actionable. So I hope you are motivated to just go right now and start decluttering your home. And, I really love the concept that he mentioned about the fact that sometimes we hold on to things, and these things that we have the most trouble letting go, it's because we've somehow attached them, to our own value, or we've at least believed we were supposed to be this person that was going to need this item or going to use this item well, but it turns out we aren't that person. I think that one of my favorite parts of minimalism is that it has helped me uncover who I really am through letting go of things that I guess defined who I thought I was, or at least things that I thought added value to myself. Minimalism has been so key in just self-discovery and learning to love myself for who I am. I hope that you dig deep enough into whatever realistic version of minimalism fits you to get to that point. And if you're still at the beginning, if you're at this place where even just the thought of decluttering and letting go of things feels overwhelming, I hope this episode was helpful to you. I hope it spurred you on to get started. And if you want more support in that, just know that the Make Room Master Course, I've talked about it a lot already here. That is a great place where I can come alongside you and cheer you on and help you through step by step if that's something that you're wanting or needing. So definitely check that out. And also, check out Joshua Becker's books. They've made such a huge difference in my life, in my family's life in general. My husband really has found a lot of value in them as well. That is all I have for today's show. There is going to be another bonus episode coming on Friday. It's going to be about how to stop cleaning up all the time. So if you do feel like you're always cleaning up your house and that's like all you ever do with your life, this episode is for you. I am going to give you actionable steps towards not living that life anymore. Don't miss that one. Subscribe now so you don't. And if you enjoyed this episode, definitely screenshot it, share it with your people on Instagram. Friend, we just reached 100,000 downloads on this podcast, which is such a huge testament to all of you being a part of this community, sharing the show, and I'm super thankful for you for that. So keep sharing it if it's making a difference for you. Thank you for that, and thank you for your role in this community. So until next time, let's walk towards simple together, friend.